In this tutorial, this time we're going to load an FBX model type instead of an OBJ, and we're going to use it for a sky dome. For skies, you can also make a sky box where the texture is warped in a way that when it's applied to a box model, the sky will still look natural the way it should. You won't be able to see seams or anything. In this one, we're doing a sky dome, and it's supposed to be better for a few different reasons according to some people, and we're also going to add a parallax cloud using additive blending that's going to rotate. So it'll kind of teach you how to manipulate different mesh parts from within, or different meshes within the model, and change the graphic states for doing certain types of effects. So you can create your dome in any software of your choice. Most 3D software tools can do this, so I'll just kind of give you a brief overview of how this was done. I'm going to turn on some snap settings here first. And so first of all, you'd create a sphere, and you'll need it to be an editable poly, so convert it, and then I'll hit F4 to show the grid lines. So what I'm going to do is use polygon selector and select all the bottom polygons. Ignore pack facing turned off because you want to be able to select all of them. Hit delete and use vertex select, grab them all, scale down by about from 100 down to 70 about, put it back down on 0. Just make sure that all the vertices are far enough down. And what we'll need is a texture. So to create our sky, you could go on the internet, find a photograph, maybe a panoramic image or an image that you have preferably, and start editing it. So first of all, we want it seamless, and we want the edge of the horizon to be fairly low. This is a little bit high up, and we would also want most of the clouds to be closer to the bottom here and the top to be more open, but this will work. So I'll show you how to make this into a texture that will warp appropriately for a sky dome. First, I'm going to select all, so I'll duplicate this layer and move it over because we want it to be seamless, and duplicate that layer. Should be able to do this in most software. Okay, once you've duplicated that background layer as a copy, Control-Shift-C, Control-Shift-V to paste in place. Hold down Shift, slide it over, and Control-Shift-V to paste another copy. Hold down Shift, slide it over. If you got snap turned on, it should just kind of click together like this. And then merge those two layers by going merge down. And now we got to figure out how to make this seamless. To do that, I'm just going to try to bring some of this, I think, over to the right. So I'll use the stamp clone tool brush, maybe put it about opacity 50%, and start doing this sort of thing. And then kind of do it from here in the other direction. And I'll zoom in a bit here and just kind of use the smudge tool. This isn't the best seam cleanup job. Obviously, you'd want to do a little tidier job here. This will be good enough for now. You even do some highlight touch-ups, try to get it to look more uniform. So now this would be a seamless texture for Skydome, but it's not going to work for the Skydome until we do this. We've got to go to Distort. First, actually, let's change the size so that it's equal in both directions, so width and height will be the same. So you want it initially to be much wider than it is tall for this to work properly. Then we change it so that the width and height are the same. This, click Merge Visible, then polar coordinates, and you should have something like this, which is actually what you want. Then save it somewhere where you can load it into your 3D software. Before I do that though, I'm just going to adjust the image a bit so that it looks a little more colorful. So I'll boost the saturation so it kind of matches a more colorful type of game theme, and then save it. Then in your 3D software, the one I'm using, I would use a UVW map unwrap. Grab the material editor, and we're going to need a bitmap material. So we'll pick that Skydome image we made, which was this one for the tutorial. This is the one I made before in my test. And I'm going to go up to Parent, Show Standard Map and Viewport, and drag it on. So first thing we need to do is relax the UV coordinates. And I'm going to open the UV editor, and I'm going to go Polygon, select by element, so select all of them. So now they're all selected, and then I'm going to go to the Relax in Tools, Edge Angles, Keep Boundary Points Fixed, start relax, and then you can see that the horizon's a little closer to the bottom, which is where we want it. So the UV coordinates are better now. So what we'll do is flip these faces. So let's collapse this to just collapse all. So it's just a editable polygon. And it's got all the UVs kind of stored in it, hidden away. And what we can do is select all the polygons and click on flip. So now it should look black, but you should see your sky on the inside. I can go into display settings here and click on backface cull. I'm only seeing the visible polygons that are facing towards the camera. So what we'd like to do is create some clouds or mist that can kind of float in front of everything that's off in the background. I'm going to go into the polygon selection mode, hold shift, and select this bottom ring of polygons. And maybe I'll hit grow to select these ones too. Okay, and what I'll do is I'm going to scale it, and I'm going to hold shift to make a clone of those polygons as a new object. So clone to object, and I'll call this cloud layer. And the name of it's going to be important because you're going to use it to determine which object it is and what to do with it once it's in your game. And we should name the original one too as Skydome. So prior to starting this tutorial, I made this image that has clouds, and the background is just black because I want to use additive blending, and I don't want the clouds to be too overpowering, so I made them a little bit dark, but you don't want to go too dark or you won't really notice the effect. So I created this new material here, which is a bitmap, and selected that cloud layer, and I'm going to drag it and drop it onto this, but you'll notice that the UV coordinates are completely wrong for what we want. So make sure that you have the cloud portion selected, the cloud layer, and add unwrap UVW, and then make sure to go point to point seams and turn off map seams. Then just click here, and you should be able to unwrap this here. Okay, actually you won't even really need to do that. You can just click on this cylindrical map thing here, line to Z, and that should actually do the trick. So now if you look in UV map editor, yeah, everything should be straight up and down. Okay, so that works. And I'm not setting this additive blending property in here. We're just going to do that in the game. Alright, so it should be ready to export to an FBX. We'll export all of it. We're going to export it as Skydome 1. Since I already made an example Skydome 1 for my testing, I'm just going to call this Skydome A. .fbx. For geometry, we don't really need smoothing groups or any of this stuff, so we can leave this all turned off. No animation, no cameras, no lights. In fact, we're going to disable lighting for these objects in basic effect when we're programming it. Units, I'm using meters. I don't think it's really going to matter. Up axis, I'm using Y up rather than Z is up, and I'm using the ASCII version because I want to be able to change the file paths, and I'm exporting with FBX version 2012. So you should be able to find fairly equivalent settings in whatever 3D software you're using, hopefully. And then we'll have to copy that FBX over into our content folder, as well as the 2 PNG files that make the textures that it's going to need to load. So I've already added them in the monogame pipeline tool. What we do is you click on content, add existing, and then just link them in here. So you'd have your cloud layer, which is that one that's going to scroll around, and the sky model FBX, and the Skydome image. For the sky model FBX, you may have to test it out and determine what direction it needs to be rotated. When FBX is exported, it does some kind of 90-degree rotation. So also make sure you've got your importer set to FBX importer. So I do this 90-degree rotation here to kind of counter the negative 90-degree rotation I had. And depending on what direction your Y is facing too, you may have to do some kind of rotation. So for me, rotating 90 degrees in the X direction was enough, but your rotations may be different, so you'll just have to test it out. So make sure to save and then hit build. Oh, before you do the build though, right click on your sky model, and I'm just going to go open with Notepad++, and what you can do is go Control F and find PNG. I've already changed these, but you want to use Control H, copy out everything that comes before this, and it'll appear here when you highlight it. So when you hit Control H, it'll appear up here, and replace it so that it's this ... content / so that it's going to look in the content folder to find the image. And you got to do that with each type. There's one for the relative file name too, so you got to do it for both types, and then just use Control H to replace all, and then save it, and it should be ready. So you should be able to save it and build it, and then go over to your game and right click and add a class called Sky and hit enter. And so our Sky class is going to need access to the graphics device and the content manager for loading the images, or the model. The model will load the images on its own. So then you'll have your model here, which contains the 2 meshes. A texture, you could have 2 textures here. I'm just using one texture and making it public. So if this texture is not null, you can use that to switch the texture to a different sky image, like if you're in a different world. So it just makes it easier to switch the texture. And I got this rotate here, which is going to control that sort of parallax, that sort of scrolling clouds that will go over top of the background. Okay, so I added a constructor and a load, which are very straightforward. It just takes a reference to the graphics processing unit and the content manager so that it has access to those. And then for load, you can just give it the string for the model name, and then in here, it'll load that model name using the content manager. I'm initializing rotate to 0, so if you loaded a new sky, it would just start at 0 again for the rotation. Not that it actually matters. So starting a draw method now. In the draw method, we accept a camera, and we're going to set some graphics card states. So that's why we're using the GPU. So GPU.blend state, we're going to set to opaque, so there's no transparency. Rasterizer state, we're not going to call anything because none of the triangles will be facing away from us anyway. And anything behind the camera is going to be called clipped automatically. The depth stencil state, we're going to set to none. There's no depth. I put this comment here to kind of explain that. We want to render our sky stuff first without depth, because if we provided depth, they're actually not that large. So our humongous scene would overlap it and you wouldn't be able to see the sky properly. So basically what you're doing is you're creating a background image, and then all the polygons are rendered over top of that. And for UV coordinates, we're going to set this to linear wrap. We're going to create a matrix that keeps track of the camera view, and we're going to strip right here, we're going to strip the translation to 0. So that cancels any movement of the camera. We just want the rotation aspect of the camera. So we'll loop through the two meshes here, and then for the effect setup, if the current mesh is the cloud layer, if you remember we named it cloud layer, we'll want to set the graphics card state, the blend state, to additive blending. So that'll kind of add the RGB values of the cloud to whatever's behind the cloud to kind of brighten whatever's behind it. Sort of a half see-through glowing kind of effect. So the clouds will kind of layer over top, kind of add the colors together. And to make it so that the clouds will rotate, we're setting the effect's world transformation to just be a matrix for rotation. And this rotate is in the yaw, if you look here. This isn't actually X, Y, Z, this is yaw, pitch, roll. So pitch, I think, would actually be the X-axis rotation, and roll would be the Z-axis rotation. And so that's why we want the yaw, because we want it to spin around the Y-axis. And we're updating it by 0.002 f per frame. It's locked at 60 frames per second, so we don't have to really worry about using game time to make sure this is moving at a specific speed. And otherwise, we set the blend state back to opaque instead of additive. We set the effects viewing matrix and the projection matrix as before, and make sure that texturing is enabled so we'll actually see the textures. If the texture up here is set to null, meaning we didn't assign it to anything, then it'll just use the default texture. Otherwise, it'll actually use the assigned texture. So in this example, the effect will already be set to point to the assigned texture for that part of the mesh. And it'll draw the two meshes as it loops. So in our game 1, we can add this sky under a 3D heading here. In initialize, we should create it, pass in the graphics device and the content manager. In load, we'll load sky model, which we already added into content, sky model. So in draw, for rendering our scene, we want to make sure to draw the sky first, and it'll have its own graphics, 3D graphic states set in there, as you just seen. And then we'll set our 3D states for all the remaining 3D models, or most of them anyway, and use them for these. To make the scene a little more interesting, I added this effect.fog enabled to be true in the draw model, and this will only apply to any models that use draw model here. So fog enabled is true, fog start I put as 2, fog end is 500, fog color just a very subtle red value of 0.04 and blue value of 0.02, so kind of a reddish purple but very, very dark. So as things get very far away, they slowly turn into a very dark, kind of blackish, dark reddish purple. Alright, so let's test this out. And the sky in the scene is a little brighter than I wanted. I wanted it to be kind of a night scene. But it looks pretty good. As you can see, as things get further away, they kind of fade to like a slightly reddish purplish black as they disappear into the distance. That's that fog effect that we added. And you can see the clouds rotating in the background, that additive blended clouds. And if I bring the camera down into the ground, you can actually look right up into the sky. When you're playing the game, your character will be able to look around, so you won't have to do it this way.